In 1992, the Europe and the world welcomed the newest of the Disney park resorts, Euro Disney. The park, similarly to the other castle parks, had various different themed lands: Frontierland, Adventureland, Fantasyland, Main Street USA, and Discoveryland. The latter replaced with many of the other parks called Tomorrowland, and fixed the major problem that plagues those lands, and that is that the future always comes sooner or later. As with every Imagineering project, the finished product looks very different than the first drawings, and in the case of Discoveryland, it went through many iterations. One thing remained in all those versions, and that was the future as seen through the eyes of great visionaries of the past, something that drew a lot of inspiration from a never-built concept by another great Imagineer.
Oh boy!
While the intro puts us in 1992, we need to go further than that. You see, the original What's Beyond Big Thunder Mountain was so much more interesting than the IP-based lands announced, or should I say talked about, in 2022. Tony Baxter, a new generation Imagineer, because this one is in the 1970s, announced a stunning new land for Disneyland. Discovery Bay would be the flagship land in any of the Disney parks, because of its extraordinary concepts, ideas, and story. To understand Discoveryland, we need to explore some of Discovery Bay, so let's dig in. The seaside port, built on the edges of the rivers of America, represents the city of San Francisco after the gold rush. But it goes further, because this version of the city had drawn international adventurers, thinkers, visionaries, and designers that would transform San Fran with the technologies and steampunk architecture. The land would be filled with references to Jules Verne, like the Nautilus, parked just by the huge Hyperion airship, where you could have a fine dining experience under the water, and attractions like the Hyperion, where you'd be invited to soar the skies in something that could be similar to the then non-existent Soarin'. There is so much more information about the outstanding land that Discovery Bay would have been, and there are a lot of amazing videos I can recommend watching if you want to learn more, but for now, I leave you with Tony Baxter himself.
Discovery Bay is kind of a once-only place in time. It's a Victorian place that occurred at the turn of the century. It's the kind of place that Jules Verne or H.G. Wells might have inhabited. So you'll actually be able to, for instance, board the Nautilus and have a very elegant meal down below the water while you're being serenaded on the pipe organ and looking out at all the scenic wonders of the ocean floor from those overhead windows. This is just one of the adventures that might go into here. There's, like I said, a flight on an aerial suspended monorail system that looks like a dirigible, and a time machine. So that's one of our key excitements for the future.
So what happened to Discovery Bay? Well, just like many Walt Disney Imagineering projects, it was too ambitious, and to the sadness of many fans, it got rolled back into the drawer. Also, not unlike many WDI projects, parts of it were brought back from time to time: Journey to Imagination, Soarin', and ours truly, Discoveryland. You see, Disney had been planning a European theme park for some time, but it got put on hold as negotiations were heated between the Walt Disney Company, France, and Spain, because both countries wanted a resort from themselves. After this uncertain time, France and Paris were ultimately chosen, and Imagineers went back to work on designing everything from the wildest ride in the wilderness to bars and toilets. For each land, there was one lead Imagineer. Discoveryland's was none other than Tim Delaney. He was in charge of creating all of Discoveryland, and so he got to work. The first thing he had to think about was the Tomorrowland problem. So, how do we fix this? By creating a future that will never come, because it came from the imagination of visionaries from the past. For the actual concrete plans and land, he found a lot of inspiration in Tony Baxter's Discovery Bay. Baxter was the lead Imagineer in the Euro Disneyland project and saw the possibility to utilize several of his older ideas. With the plan in mind, it was time to start sketching, and so they did. There were many versions of Discoveryland, but at its core, the idea was mixing both Tomorrowland and Discovery Bay, in order to create something completely new and impressive. From Tomorrowland, Imagineers would take attractions such as Space Mountain, but make it 100 times more impressive. I'll get to it in a minute. From Discovery Bay would come the architecture, sense of wonder, and timeline, if you will. These two concepts together would create one of the most impressive looking lands ever designed by Imagineering. I'm not even talking about this, which is pretty impressive and one of my favorites. But no, not our Discoveryland. This Discoveryland. Similarly to the other lands of tomorrow, you can see that the world on the move was taken quite literally here, with loads of kinetic energy. There are several levels of movement that can be seen in this concept art alone, with boats in the water, people walking, the Euro Disneyland Railroad, the Orbitron, this spinner ride, and on top of it all, a Skyliner that would take you over everything. I'll give you a moment to soak in all the amazing detail, and just to think that this was even proposed. There, that should do it. Oh, I must warn you before continuing on exploring, there's very little known information on this version of the land, and so some parts will be pure speculation. There, you have been warned. Let's start things strongly by going over the boats. Here we see Captain Nemo's Nautilus, and several boats roaming around with guests inside. Notice anything strange about this particular boat? It has some speed, the water is splashing, and people have their hands in the air. This sounds exactly like what a boat looks like after a drop. Well, it's likely that another idea from Discovery Bay had been used here, and that is a boat ride. In this concept on the Californian proposed land, we see a boat coming down a waterfall. And just by the Nautilus, we have a big mountain that could be where the drop would be held. But pay attention to the rock formation. The keen eyes among you may just realize that this looks extremely similar to the mysterious island from Tokyo Disney Sea, a park that took a whole lot of inspiration from these concepts. But we'll leave that for another video. With Mysterious Island in Discoveryland, things have suddenly got a lot more interesting. Guests would board their boats and go for what can only be described as a scenic route around the huge body of water, by passing through most of the land, giving them a completely different point of view. Then things start to get heated, or cooler? You see, the novel with the same name by Jules Verne talks about an island where you can find Captain Nemo's hideout and the home port of his submarine. In the island, there are several huge animals, and in the end, the volcano erupts and everything sinks into the ocean. I would assume that the boats enter this volcanic mountain, and inside the guests are presented with a dark ride section of the ride, with scenes showcasing parts of the book's story. Then, things start heating up as the volcano is about to explode, and just before it does, the mountain spits the boats and guests scream as they fall and splash down on the water. That's one of the possible themes, the other being the journey to the center of the earth. In that novel, a group goes to the center of the earth where they discover all types of fantastical creatures, produce an explosion, and the volcano shoots them out, which seems to be even more likely since Tokyo later built a ride around this exact theme. With either story, this boat ride would be an incredible attraction. But before leaving Mysterious Island, this structure here caught my eye, because it's very similar to the Nautilus gift shop in Tokyo. And then there's another circle, which I think could be the entrance to the second attraction of this area of the land, and that is the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea Dark Ride, which is such an impressive ride over at Tokyo Disney Sea, and would have been completely impossible because we know that Disney would consider bringing it to Discoveryland some years later. I recommend watching this cancelled video to learn more about that. It seems likely that guests will be able to either explore or dine in the Nautilus, which is something that had been proposed for the land. With this, we can leave Mysterious Island, and continuing our journey through the attractions present in the land, we come across the railroad. As you know, the train chugs around the entirety of the park, and Discoveryland is no exception. What's different is the way it would have been presented in the land. Similarly to what's there now, the tracks would be found at the back of the land, but because of the immense body of water, an incredible suspended bridge would be a stunning new feature to the ride and the land. After crossing the bridge and making its way over the water, the trains arrive at the Discoveryland station, which would be found at the back of the land in front of the huge Space Mountain show building. It's possible that the station could look like this concept art, but this seems to be a newer version of the more advanced project. In this concept, it seems like the station would be simpler and more steampunky. While talking about transportation, we can move on to one of the most impressive parts of the whole land, and that's what's roaming in the sky. The Skyway over Disneyland had opened in 1956 and gave those who rode an amazing view of Tomorrowland and Fantasyland as they went from one to the other. Euro Disneyland's version would be similar in that it also transported guests from Discoveryland to Fantasyland, but it took things further than ever before. Themed to smaller Hyperion airships, these gondolas would take guests on a tour to the four corners of Discoveryland before making its way to the second station. By flying around, you'd see the entire land in a completely different way, exploring everything from above, even the risky turn over Mysterious Island. This centerpiece would serve several purposes, one of them being the main support to the Hyperion airships. To enter and actually fly in one of those, guests would get to the station behind the Hyperion Cafe, right here. This would be the entrance to the land for those flying from Fantasyland. Talking about the Hyperion Cafe, it seemed that this is one of the things that survived all of the versions Discoveryland passed through, as this would be a huge theater, similar to the existing Videopolis, as can be confirmed here. Another purpose of the centerpiece would be to hold the Orbitron. This concept shows exactly that, a very similar version of the rocket jets, but in a steampunk style. This is similar to what we have today in the park, but this version would be on top of a structure, providing a more thrilling experience with a much better view of everything. But Orbitron wouldn't be the only spinner attraction here. At the back, we have an even more thrilling ride. Being a similar yet more themed and less scary version of Star Flyer, you'd fly aboard what seems to be a vehicle designed by Leonardo da Vinci, the flying machines themselves, an invention from the 15th century brought to life before our very eyes. I mean, how cool does that sound? After going up and spinning over Discoveryland, guests would safely make their way down once again. Well, now there's one last thing we need to address, and that is the e-ticket, the main ride, the king of Discoveryland, Space Mountain. In this version of Discoveryland, it's unknown what Space Mountain would be like, which makes my job a lot harder. We know about the indoor Discovery Mountain that would hold many experiences, but that only came in a much later phase. So, what would this one be like? We can see that the building itself is outside of the park berms, which is similar to Disney World's version. But from the get-go, Tim Delaney said that he didn't want a regular Space Mountain in his version. So, what could it be? By taking an educated guess, I think it's similar to what ended up happening. Not this Discovery Mountain with all the experiences, and not the Space Mountain we got, but something in between. It probably was a very thrilling coaster, themed to a story from Jules Verne, quite possibly From the Earth to the Moon, but highly themed and completely inside, with the entrance, queue, and some surrounding area inside the big dome, recreating a starry night sky with a moon in the distance, inviting guests. But that's just my guess of what could be hidden inside this huge structure, and there could have been something completely different. So the question now is, what happened to all these amazing ideas? I fear you might already know the answer. Money. All this would have been incredible, yes, but also incredibly expensive. Many of the ideas went to find their way into the current park, other parks, and even other versions of Discoveryland. Versions that were as amazing and exciting as this, versions I will explore in the next video. Well everyone, that's it. Hopefully you enjoyed. I truly did enjoy exploring, researching, and chatting about this project, and if you made it this far, I take it you find it interesting as well. If you did, make sure to leave a like so the video can reach other people. I make videos on theme parks from the past to the future, so if you like that, consider subscribing. And now, as always, thank you for watching, and that's a wrap.